views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the staff, management, or sponsors of this radio station. They're mine today and my guest. And now this is Sans Dave today because he's on a plane coming back from the meeting in Pensacola, Florida. I want to thank you very much for joining us in the Power Hour today. And the meeting, I want to repeat, for those of you just joining us, the meeting in St. Louis was awesome with Ron Paul and Judge Napolitano. It was unbelievable. Standing room only. It was so inspirational. These people are serious. They know we're losing our country, and they are going to do everything they can to bring it back. And I mean, they are working as hard as they can. Anyway, we're working here at the Power Hour also. And in this next hour, you're going to hear from Jim Motika, who has a story to tell you about what he learned from one company in their preparation for the pandemic. It appears that the date, I would say, my opinion at this point is anywhere from April 15th to May 15th. And it looks like it's real. They're continuing and they're ranting or ratcheting up this whole issue of the pandemic hitting. But we are going to be joined this hour, of course, the financial pandemic that's occurring in this country. We're going to be joined by Bob Chapman, who's the editor of the International Forecaster newsletter. And I have to tell you, I'm so glad he's joining us every Monday so we can find out what in the world is happening in this country over the weekend. But if you have not gotten a copy of his newsletter, the phone number to reach to get it is 877-479-8178, 877-479-8178 to get the International Forecaster newsletter, or go to theinternationalforecaster.com. Bob Chapman, thank you for joining us in the Power Hour today.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to be here again, and I see that you're well underway. I was listening to the end of the last hour, and I guess this pandemic is going to be something.
Well, it really is looking like it's real now. I mean, it's amazing the stories that we've been finding recently, and but. Let's talk, and by the way, some of the articles that I've gotten say that the financial crisis is going to make the pandemic worse. So they're capitalizing on both of these events together and using them probably in a synergistic way, but it looks as though it's coming. We already know that the financial tsunami is here, and hopefully you can make some sense as to why the U.S. government is now running General Motors. Any ideas how a government can now run a motor company?
Well, under corporatist fascism, this is the modus operandi, and it's not only companies like automobile manufacturers, but it's financial institutions and other corporations as time goes on. And what they do is they nationalize them by injecting money into them. And then eventually what happens is they can't function. And then for 10 cents or 5 cents on the dollar, they're sold to private interests, and miraculously they recover. And this is what they're going through in every industry now. It's a method of accumulation of assets. If you've noticed, the major amount of money that's been produced, we'll say, has gone to the financial industry, to certain companies to keep them in business. What they did is these companies went out and gambled, and they lost, and we get to pay for it. Now, the 21-month problem that we've had is worse off now than it was 21 months ago. They have made really no inroads in solving it. And so the next step is, and you mentioned this earlier in the broadcast, is the G20 meeting. This is only the second or third that they've had in the last 10 or 12 years. And so it's very important. And how this relates to the stock market is interesting. I've been in the markets almost 50 years, and in the olden days, we used to have what they call tape readers, and a tape would come across with symbols, and the shares traded. And you got to be a tape reader as a trader by watching it, and it gives off rhythm. and that's the way you traded. And nowadays they have it, but they put the names of the companies on there to make it simple for people. But anyway, the rhythm in the last week was, let's get the market up and keep it up as high as we can in anticipation of this coming meeting.
You know, you are so right. I am so glad to hear you say that, because I thought immediately when that market started going up for absolutely no reason. I mean, they kept trying to find some kind of indicator that we can use to say that the market's going up, but they couldn't really find anything. And so as a result of that, they had to get that market back up again because it was going to tumble again, correct?
Yes, and they call that putting a cushion in. So they took it up 1,200 Dow points. It's lost momentum this morning. It's off almost 200 points. But this, again, is an anticipation of the G20. At the same time, they really banged the commodity market around. The averages were down again last week. They call out the CRB index. And Goldman Sachs also has a similar index. And they knocked gold back down from 960 to around 910 this morning. And that's all part of it, because what's coming out of G20 is dreadful. Now, if it's dreadful, the market and markets will go down. Gold, silver, and commodities will go up. Mm-hmm. So they had to put the Dow or stocks like that, the S&P, the NASDAQ, and so on, they had to put them up so that they had room to come down so they wouldn't go lower than 6,600 on the Dow. At the same time, had they left gold at 960 and this wretched news came out later in the week, it'd probably be 2,000. So you can see the game that these people are playing. This is done through the Working Group on Financial Markets, which is legal. It's a executive order by Ronald Reagan, August 1988, after the collapse in 87 of the stock market. Well-intentioned and, of course, maligned because they're using it 24/7 to manipulate every market in the world. And they won't tell you anything about it because it's a state secret. Well, with that said, what are we heading into? Well, the rest of the world is very unhappy that their economies are all going into depression like the American economy is and the British economy is. So everybody's headed that way, and they're mad. And already we're seeing tariffs going up in China, in Russia, subsidization of industries such as automobiles in France and automobiles in America, which you mentioned earlier. Incidentally, they just kicked the CEO out. And in 2 hours, our president's going to tell us what they're going to do with General Motors and Chrysler. And anyway, so we have the breaking down of the World Trade Organization and all these other treaties because they're reimposing subsidies and tariffs. And for America, that is the best possible thing that can happen to us because that'll stop offshoring, outsourcing, free trade, and globalization. And it's a price they have to pay, just like a collapsing dollar eventually, to do what they're doing internationally in the economy and particularly in finance.
Let me go back to a couple of things here. On this new takeover of the government's running of General Motors and the new COO, or the letting go of Rick Warren and then putting in the COO of General Motors, is this just basically changing the chairs on the Titanic?
Yes.
And why is
the Titanic for the automobile industry set sail in 1980. This was planned that long ago because that's when Ford and GM and Chrysler started making plans to do all their production in other countries. This didn't just happen. Mm-hmm. It was planned this way. And if you go back and read Foreign Affairs, the House literary organ of the Council on Foreign Relations, it's all there. Read the book written by the former head of Chrysler in 1991, 92, 93, in that time frame, and it tells you exactly what's going to happen. Lee Iacocca is his name.
Mm-hmm.
And runs a charity in his later years. He's in his mid-80s now. But the point is that this just didn't happen.
Well, CEO Rick Wagner, CEO Rick Wagner is now on his way out. He's been there for 10 years, and of course, Fritz Anderson's taking over this position. A lot of people are wondering, and your point is, and so, I mean, what's the difference going to be here? Because he's pretty much been the same as Rick Wagner. So now is the purpose, and of course, GM wants more money now. So now are we going to be providing them more money? Do you think there are a lot of people that are thinking they cannot restructure and that there's no other alternative other than bankruptcy, but they've just been trying to give them as much money as possible before the bankruptcy.